guess we can talk about the Wuhan lab leak theory now. Ah, man, that was a pretty big turnaround and pretty quick one as well. It's gone from you will get banned if you even suggest that the official China explanation of how the coronavirus came into existence, if you even suggest that's inaccurate, well, you're banned, to, well, this seems like the most possible theory that there is, and every other theory seems like it has a whole bunch of holes in it that don't really make sense. Which is the position that a lot of people have had for around a year. From word go, you could tell this whole, oh, it came from a wet market and a bat, was fishy as all get out. Because, let's be frank, the only evidence that was ever proffered to that respect was exactly what China themselves were saying. And, of course, I'm going to get some pushback saying, well, no, the WHO said that was the most likely theory as well, but I repeat myself, those aren't different things. I don't know if I need to remind you, but the WHO was so much enthralled to China that back in the day, the WHO director refused to even acknowledge Taiwan's existence and bailed on an interview because the interviewer brought it up in a question, and we'll just put that there. This is the level of person we're dealing with. Now, some of these people have feigned wanting a full and thorough investigation into the origins of the coronavirus after doing two and getting literally nothing done, and only accomplishing one thing, that would be showing exactly how absolutely opaque China has been throughout this whole entire process. But there was a lot of evidence to show from the beginning that there was some sort of the Wuhan lab, which, by the way, Dr. Fauci was funding. Strange that. Not saying that it was... Not saying anything. Just strange. It's just a coincidence, guys. But there was a lot of evidence to suggest it at first. There was already intelligence going back to, February, March, with a story about the actual guy who first got it, who had, like, a bat pee on him or something, and then eventually getting the disease through that. There was already that story coming out in February, March-ish. I don't remember exactly the date, but it was around that time. And there was lots of evidence pointing to that fact, because even if you accept that the major outbreaks began in the wet market, it makes sense that it would come from the lab, because the lab was only about a few blocks away, or something like that. Not a far distance to travel for a disease, especially one that would later become a pandemic. But, of course, this was all completely rejected out of hand by many in the media, and, of course, all of the Democrats, because they are all, of course, enthralled to China. And this is one of the more funny things that has happened over the past 48 hours, is that Maggie Haberman said that, oh no, the reason this theory wasn't taken seriously, it was that Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo, is because they were pushing it that it didn't get taken seriously. And I actually kind of believe that, because these people are so petty. These people are so obsessed with Donald Trump and what he says and contradicting all of that they would totally be willing to push out this totally legitimate and so far seeming most likely theory of where the virus even came from out of hand because someone they didn't like first proffered it. Or not even first, he was not even really one of the forerunners of this particular theory. He was just someone who was like, yeah, this kind of makes sense, and we have some intelligence that suggests this may be the case. And the thing that changed all of this, the thing that showed all of these posturings from the media to be really just that, was an intelligence drop that we got not too long ago, just around 48 hours ago, that showed that there were many doctors working in that lab who ended up being hospitalized due to an unknown disease back in November 2019. A full month before we have a lot of talk about a potential infection in China, and a full 2 months before we ever get an acknowledgement from China that it's even spreading from person to person. This is all happening right around that time. It's strange. it's almost as though we can't trust anything China says. I mean, I know I harp on this all the time, but you can't trust anything out of China. Whether it be their economic numbers, which should be obvious, or whether it be their death rates, or whether it be their actual case numbers, you can't trust anything they say, because every single statistic they do and show to the public, and particularly the public outside of China, are all designed to make the Chinese government, the CCP, look as good as possible. See also the Soviet Union. I don't know how people keep falling for this, frankly, on a bit of a tangent. The Soviet Union and the Soviet archives were opened back in the late 90s, or back in the 90s. And from there, we realized that a lot of what the Soviets were saying was complete nonsense and didn't actually make sense from what was being said. And since the Soviet archives have opened, a lot of history books have had to either be rewritten or had to have completely new books written about the Soviet archives and the information within, because they were so much different from what we were being told to begin with. Now, everyone kind of had a sense, even back then, that the Soviets were lying about a lot of their statistics, but somehow, even though we have full evidence that communist governments tend to lie about their statistics, people continue to believe China's statistics as if they're rote, as if there's nothing you can do but just accept them. And these are even coming from people who are anti-establishment and aren't ones to trust the figures inherently anyway. But that's a bit of a tangent. To get back more to the main subject of this video, and to the absolute fear-mongering and all this sort of stuff that's been going on within American news media and within the credentialists over in the CDC, you know, the Dr. Fauci's and the like. This example, this whole story of the Wuhan lab leak and the theory going from wild conspiracy theory to the most plausible theory for what actually happened overnight, all of that exactly shows what the problems of censorship are, and what the problems of these non-scientists, these credentialists, end up being. Because I have explained many times in the past about the times where Dr. Fauci or the CDC will completely flip on its head and invert their explanation of how the science works, and say, well, no, that's just the scientific process happening. Well, I'm just going to try and lay that myth to bed right here, because it is one of the most nonsensical things that I think these sorts of people have ever said. Science doesn't generally invert, all right? It's not that one day we think of gravity as something which pulls us towards the Earth, and then the next day we think of gravity as something that pulls us away from the Earth. We don't do that. It doesn't flip on a dime. The way science works is that we slowly come to the correct conclusion. And though we may be wrong to begin with, and even very wrong to begin with, the actual turn towards the truth and the reality of the matter is a slow turn. If you are wrong, you slowly but surely move in that direction as you get more data pointing in that direction. But the thing is, in this case, is that they were either coming out way ahead of the science, as would be the case in the Wuhan lab example, where they are completely disregarding a completely legitimate theory just because they don't like who's saying it and don't like the implications on their centrally planned dream, which is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Republic of China at this point. But they are also completely reversing what has been hundreds of years of precedent within science, as would be the case with mask mandates. We already knew back in 1920 about the fact that mask mandates didn't really work. There was already studies going back then, because guess what? This isn't the first time people have gotten paranoid and completely done something nonsensical and superstitious. It's not the first time it's happened. It's happened in the past when we had science, and when we did that, we found out it didn't work. Or if it did work, it was so marginal it didn't matter. All that exists. All that research exists. Surgical masks, as we know of them, have existed for years. Even replaceable masks have existed for years. And we've known that they don't really do a lot for pandemics, but we continue to use them, even to this day, because the scientists, or the credentialists is a more accurate term, just decided to invert what the data actually says with their models. And what has ended up happening again is that once again, all of the actual data studies, all of the actual data analysis that have come out in the recent memory, that have come out over the past few months and weeks, have shown that there is almost no reason to have a mask mandate. And if it does do anything at all, it is so marginal, it hardly matters at all. I already talked about a few weeks ago, I think it was actually more like a month and a half ago, about the mask narrative collapsing. That was the name of the video. And I talked about there in about a study where it showed that mask mandates, at most, limited the spread of coronavirus by 2%. Which is an utter absurdity in comparison to the 70%, 40% that was being claimed by many of the models, which were the authoritative sources before that data came to light. Actual data rather than fake data, as would be the case with many of these models. And this, once again, it's linked in the description, so go and check that source if you want to. It's from the CDC. It's not something sketchy or anything like that. But there was another study that came out today, and this one isn't as reputable. It's not directly from the CDC. But there is another study that was actual data analysis that showed that in schools, mask mandates don't really work. That's also down in the description. I do suggest that you check that out, because these are the studies which are actually real. And, of course, all of these studies which are actually accurate, which actually show things that are reality, and actually take real data and compare it to real data to get an accurate conclusion onto what's actually happening and what the actual factors do, these sorts of studies will be roundly criticized by many of the people on the credentialist scientists side of the argument, that these studies, well, they have all these problems. They didn't analyze the data correctly enough, or they didn't go thoroughly enough. Completely ignoring, of course, that their studies have a more fundamental issue. That being that they don't have real data almost at all. You can take the Germany study, for example, a real famous one that gets thrown around a lot online whenever someone says, well, mask mandates don't seem to work in reality. You see, in that case, that study was based on, we did German statistics, we did it with the mask mandate, okay? So you have those numbers. And then what they did is they assumed that the mask would do, 30%. It would reduce it by 30%. They then put it into equation to jumble up the numbers, to make it look somewhat random, and then they gave you a new set of numbers that showed, oh wow, it was a 30% reduction. That's what they did. That's not a study. It's a hypothesis at best, misleading at worst, absolute distortion of science at worst. That's what that is. And that's what all of these people have been doing this entire way through. And that's what the censorship has been doing as well, because you're not even allowed to have the debate on many social media platforms. Of course, up until the point where they suddenly turn on a dime and come around to the actual science when they can no longer refute it, as is the case in the Wuhan lab example, in which case, now it's totally fine. Utterly absurd. That is what this whole saga has been. And you know what? I think I'm done talking about it. If you enjoyed this video, do in fact subscribe down below wherever you are. And if you are on YouTube and another terrible platform, go and check the links down in the description. Very pretty links. They'll send you all over the place, whether it be to BitChute or to Odyssey or Brighteon or wherever. Rumble. I don't really like Rumble, but whatever. That's just as a user thing. I think it's fine, but as a creator, it's annoying. I won't get into it. But on top of that, you have this wonderful community called breakingonthedaily.locals.com. Go there, breakingonthedaily.locals.com. Another very pretty link. I suggest you go check that out. Also, share this video if you enjoyed it. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys off. I'm KelKidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.